Thanks to all who have joined us by WebEx for standing by. Welcome to the open meeting of the Public Company Accounting Oversight Board. During the meeting, you'll be in listen-only mode. As a reminder, this meeting is being recorded, and a recording is expected to be made available on the PCAOB website. I would now like to turn to Chair Williams to formally convene the meeting.
Good morning and welcome, everyone. This is an open meeting of the Public Company Accounting Oversight Board on March 28, 2023. We welcome those of you who have joined us today by webcast or dialing into the teleconference. Before we proceed with the agenda, I will note for the record that all board members are present and participating in this meeting, and we are able to hear one another. The only order of business before the board today is a staff recommendation that the board propose for public comment a new auditing standard that would reorganize and consolidate certain aspects of the board's existing interim standards that address core principles and responsibilities of the auditor, such as due professional care and professional skepticism. To present the staff's recommendation, I will turn to our Office of Chief Auditor, Barb Vanich.
Good morning, Chair Williams and board members Disparte, Ho, Stein, and Thompson. The Office of the Chief Auditor is pleased to recommend that the board issue a proposal on the general responsibilities of the auditor in conducting an audit. The general responsibilities and principles of the auditor include reasonable assurance, due professional care, professional skepticism, independence, competence, and professional judgment. These principles and related responsibilities provide a foundation for the proper performance of the audit, apply to all audits, and therefore are important to audit quality and investor protection. Through this proposal, we are reaffirming the general principles and responsibilities to ensure that the foundation continues to be solid and appropriate for maintaining high-quality audits. These principles and responsibilities, together with modernizing audit standards, should equip the auditor with better tools to protect investors. Further, through this proposal, we would remind auditors of their fundamental obligation to the public by serving as the protector of the public interest in the integrity of financial statements. The Supreme Court described this responsibility as a public watchdog function that demands that the accountant maintain total independence from the client at all times and requires complete fidelity to the public trust. We believe it is important to explicitly remind auditors of their obligation to protect investors through the preparation and issuance of informative, accurate, and independent auditor reports. Currently, the general principles and responsibilities are addressed in 4 foundational standards that were part of the interim standards adopted by the PCAOB in 2003. They include AS 1001, Responsibilities and Functions of the Independent Auditor, AS 1005, Independence, AS 1010, Training and Proficiency of the Independent Auditor, and AS 1015, Due Professional Care in the Performance of Work. The proposal before you today would reorganize and combine the general principles and responsibilities from these foundational standards into one standard, AS 1000, General Responsibilities of the Auditor in Conducting an Audit, to reflect changes in the auditing environment, eliminate outdated and inconsistent language, and increase consistency with PCAOB standards. Additionally, the proposal includes amendments to other standards that address responsibilities that are fundamental to the conduct of an audit. In developing this proposal, we've considered changes in the auditing environment since the adoption of the foundational standards, including changes to auditing requirements through board-issued standards, new or revised independence rules issued by the board, and finally, advancements in technology affecting the audit. We believe that this proposal aligns with the board's strategic plan to modernize and streamline the existing standards. Today, we are recommending that the board seek public comment on the new standard, as well as related amendments to PCAOB standards. I would like to acknowledge the many people within the PCAOB who provided significant contributions to this project. I would like to express my sincere appreciation to the team that led this project, Jessica Watts, Dominika Taraskevich, Hunter Jones, Ekaterina Disna, and Akiko Upchurch from the Office of the Chief Auditor, as well as our other OCA colleagues who provided support on the project. Additionally, I would like to thank colleagues from other offices for their significant contributions. In particular, Mike Gerbett, Dylan Rassier, and John Cook in the Office of Economic and Risk Analysis, and Vince Meehan, Katie Riley, and Connor Rasso in the Office of General Counsel. I would also like to recognize the support provided by staff from the Division of Registration and Inspections, the Division of Enforcement and Investigations, and the Office of Communications and Engagement. Finally, I would like to thank the Security and Exchange Commission staff, including the staff of the SEC's Office of the Chief Accountant, for their support and timely assistance with the project. Akiko Upchurch and Dominika Taraskevich of the Office of the Chief Auditor will now provide an overview of the proposal, and then Dylan Rassier of the Office of Economic and Risk Analysis will provide some additional remarks, followed by our recommendation. Akiko?
Thank you, Barb. Good morning, Chair Williams and board members. I'm going to provide an overview of proposed standard and its key provisions. The proposed standard is designed to streamline and clarify the general principle and responsibilities described in the foundational standards and provide a more logical presentation. As Barb indicated, the general principles and responsibilities of auditor include reasonable assurance, due professional care, professional skepticism, independence, competence, and professional judgment. We believe that these principles and responsibilities are generally understood by auditors and important to investors, and they lay the appropriate groundwork for audits performed under PCAOB standards. The proposed standard retains the general principles and responsibilities and clarifies certain related provisions. I will now highlight a few of these provisions. With respect to requirements on independence, the proposed standard expresses the auditor's obligation to be independent by referring to the PCAOB's independence rules and standards and the SEC's independence criteria. This includes incremental independence obligations that were added after adoption of the foundational standards but not explicitly addressed in those standards. The proposed standard also describes the auditor's obligation to comply with ethics requirements, obtain and maintain competence, and prepare audit documentation. While these responsibilities are not new, the proposed standard provides more specificity around how the auditor complies with the requirements. For example, the proposed standard states that the auditor is required to develop and maintain competence through an appropriate combination of academic education, professional experience in accounting and auditing with proper supervision, and training, including accounting, auditing, independence, ethics, and other relevant continuing professional education. Similar to foundational standards, the proposed standard addresses the auditor's responsibilities for due professional care and professional skepticism. The proposed standard reaffirms the meaning of these important principles, describes responsibilities related to professional judgment, and provides additional clarification with respect to the engagement partner's responsibility for exercising due professional care. This includes more directly aligning the partner's existing responsibilities for supervision and review with the exercise of due professional care. Lastly, The proposed standard retains and clarifies the auditor's fundamental responsibilities for conducting an audit, including obtaining reasonable assurance, complying with applicable professional and legal requirements, and making required communications. In addition to reinforcing these important principles, we believe these clarifications will make the proposed standard easier to read, understand, and apply. Now, I would like to hand it over to Dominika Tereskevich, who will discuss amendments to other PCAOB standards included in the proposal.
Thanks, Akiko. Good morning, Chair Williams and board members. This morning, I will discuss several important proposed amendments to other PCAOB standards that address responsibilities fundamental to the conduct of an audit. The first of these amendments relates to the engagement partner's existing responsibilities for supervision and review. Proper supervision by the engagement partner includes evaluating that the work of engagement team members was performed and documented. The proposed amendments clarify the extent of the planning, supervisory, review, and documentation activities to be performed by the engagement partner as part of exercising due professional care. I'd like to spend a few minutes to describe these provisions. First, the proposed amendments clarify that the engagement partner seeks assistance when the engagement partner seeks assistance from appropriate engagement team members, the engagement partner retains the primary responsibility for the engagement and its performance. The assistance provided by those engagement team members who supervise and review the work of other engagement team members does not replace or reduce the engagement partner's responsibility. Next, the proposed amendments specify that, as part of exercising due professional care, the engagement partner is required to review sufficient documentation to determine that the engagement was performed as planned, significant judgments were appropriate, and significant findings and issues were appropriately addressed, the conclusions expressed in the auditor's report are appropriate and supported by sufficient appropriate evidence, and matters requiring communication under applicable professional and legal requirements are appropriately identified and communicated. The proposed amendment further provides that the engagement partner's review includes review of documentation of significant findings or issues as described in the documentation standard, and review of documentation that is also subject to review by the engagement quality reviewer. The proposed amendments also emphasize that the engagement partner and other engagement team members performing supervisory activities are required to complete their review of audit documentation prior to the report release date. We believe that the engagement partner's review of audit documentation is an important part of supervision. Lastly, the proposed amendments clarify the requirement for audit documentation to identify who performed the work, who reviewed the work, and the date of such review. We believe that the amendments I just described help clarify the engagement partner's existing obligations for supervision and review as the engagement team member with the primary responsibility for the engagement. The second area addressed in the proposed amendments that I'd like to discuss relates to assembling a complete and final set of audit documentation. Existing provisions on documenting and reviewing the performance of audit procedures require the auditor to complete audit documentation within 45 days of releasing the auditor's report. That provision was adopted by the PCAOB almost 20 years ago, before the widespread use of electronic documentation. Given the importance of audit documentation to the conduct of an audit, the proposal includes an amendment to accelerate the period for the auditor to assemble a complete and final set of audit documentation for retention from 45 days to 14 days. We believe that an accelerated documentation completion reflects changes in the auditing environment, including advancements in technology that have enabled auditors to assemble a complete and final set of audit documentation in less time than in a paper-based environment. The last amendment that I'd like to touch on today relates to the auditor's evaluation of whether the financial statements are presented fairly. Currently, AS 2810, Evaluating Audit Results, requires the auditor to evaluate whether the financial statements are presented fairly in all material respects in conformity with the applicable financial reporting framework. The meaning of this evaluation is described in a separate standard, AS 2815, called the meaning of presented fairly in conformity with general accounting principles. The proposal retains and clarifies the underlying requirements of AS 2815, but incorporates them into AS 2810 for a more logical presentation. Under this approach, AS 2815 is proposed to be rescinded. That concludes my remarks. Thank you for your time and attention. I will now turn the floor over to Dylan to provide some additional remarks, followed by our recommendation. After that, we would be happy to respond to any questions you may have.
Thank you, Dominica, and good morning, Chair Williams and board members. The current foundational audit standards contain the necessary components for firms to conduct quality audits, but the language and organization of the current foundational standards are not aligned with developments in auditing standards that have occurred since their adoption on an interim basis in 2003. This may detract from efficient use of the standards. In addition, available evidence, including observations from our regulatory activities, indicates that audit engagement partners may be falling short in certain aspects of their supervision of the audit. Finally, our current standards for archiving work papers may not sufficiently reflect today's widespread use of electronic audit tools and audit software. The proposed changes that my colleagues from the Office of the Chief Auditor just finished outlining should clarify the foundational standards by updating their language and organization, and should enhance audit quality by reinforcing engagement partners' oversight responsibilities and by enabling earlier PCAOB inspections. The changes could improve efficient use of the standards, promote consistency across audits, and reduce the window of opportunity for improper alteration of audit documentation. We generally expect that the benefits and costs of the proposed changes would be modest. Modernization of the foundational standards may result in efficiency gains associated with users requiring less time and attention to read, understand, and apply the standards. A modernized standard may also enhance investors and audit committees' understanding of the auditor's responsibilities, which could facilitate more appropriate pricing of risk and better communication with auditors. Further, clarification of the engagement partner's responsibility for work paper review may improve an engagement partner's evaluation of audit evidence to the extent that the engagement partner does not currently perform an appropriate review. Finally, the amendment to accelerate the documentation completion date may support timelier inspections and enhance performance for firms that implement operating efficiencies. Firms would also incur costs to implement the proposed standards. The changes to the foundational standards and engagement partner review of work papers would principally involve costs for firms to update references within their methodologies. But to the extent that an engagement partner does not currently conduct an appropriate review of work papers, engagement level costs would increase as a result of the partner conducting an appropriate review. With respect to the acceleration of the documentation completion date, firms with operating circumstances that currently would not enable them to meet an accelerated completion date would incur costs associated with investments in operating practices and audit documentation systems to speed their processes. In closing, I would like to thank our colleagues in the Office of the Chief Auditor and the Office of the General Counsel at the PCAOB and our friends at the SEC for their collaboration in the development of our economic analysis. With that, I'd like to hand it back to Barb to present the staff's recommendation.
Thank you, team. In closing, the staff is recommending that the board issue for public comment a proposal related to the general responsibilities of the auditor in conducting an audit and related amendments to board standards substantially in the form provided to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Barb, Akiko, Dominica, and Dylan. At this time, my fellow board members and I will have the opportunity to make a statement or ask questions to the staff. We will proceed in the order of seniority, and I will begin. Late last year, my fellow board members and I issued our strategic plan. One of the board's key goals included in our plan is modernizing our professional standards. Our capital markets never stop evolving, and it's important for PCAOB standards to keep up so that investors are protected. The proposal before us today would update our standards to do just that. As explained by our staff, the new proposed standard AS1000 would replace a group of standards originally developed by the American Institute of Certified Public Accountants and adopted on an interim basis by the PCAOB in 2003. Those standards address reasonable assurance, due professional care, professional skepticism, independence, competence, and professional judgment, collectively what we refer to as the foundational standards. Merging these foundational standards into one standard would reaffirm the general principles and responsibilities of the auditor and solidify the foundation of every audit, leading to investor protection and informative, accurate, and independent audit reports. While the proposed standard and related amendments advance investor protection in many ways, I want to specifically highlight 3 aspects of today's proposal. First, the proposed standard specifically recognizes auditors' fundamental obligation to protect investors through the preparation and issuance of informative, accurate, and independent auditors' reports, and makes clear that that obligation governs the auditor's work under the standards of the PCAOB. Second, the proposal also makes clear that due to the importance of the role of the engagement partner, it is essential that the engagement partner is actively involved throughout the audit. As noted in today's standards, the engagement partner is responsible for the engagement and its performance. Hence, it is the engagement partner's responsibility to provide informative, accurate, and independent audit reports. That is why we are proposing to clarify what is expected of the engagement partner when planning, supervising, reviewing, and documenting engagement activities. Third, we are proposing to modernize aspects of the audit documentation standard. Specifically, we are proposing to shorten the time to assemble the final audit documentation from no more than 45 days to 14 days. An auditor's documentation provides the evidence to support whether the engagement complied with PCAOB standards. Our audit documentation standard, AS 1215, was adopted by the PCAOB in 2004. Part of that standard, which remains in effect today, requires a complete and final set of audit documentation to be assembled for retention no more than 45 days after the report release date, known as the documentation completion date. Since 2004, like our capital markets, audits have continued to evolve. Back in 2004, many firms documented at least part of their procedures using paper-based systems. As we have observed through our oversight activities, today most, if not all, of the documentation is now occurring electronically. Because of this, it takes firms significantly less time to compile a complete and final set of audit documentation compared to when AS 1215 became effective. It is critical that the documentation is completed as close in time as possible to the completion of the audit. The PCAOB cannot begin an inspection until a complete and final set of audit documentation is assembled. Proposing to advance the document completion date from 45 to 14 days would enable the PCAOB to potentially begin our inspection process sooner. This would lead to a waterfall effect that ultimately would provide the opportunity for us to get our inspection reports to investors sooner, enhancing their protection. I look forward to learning commoners' views on the proposed standard and related amendments as we work to ensure our standards advance our investor protection mandate and are fit to meet today's challenges. I encourage all to comment. I would like to thank the individuals that have devoted significant effort on this proposal, Specifically, I would like to thank in the Office of Chief Auditor, Barb Vantage, Jessica Watts, Dominika Tarasevich, Ekaterina Disna, Akiko Upchurch, and Hunter Jones. In the Office of Economic and Risk Analysis, Mike Gerbit, Dylan Rassier, and John Cook. And in the Office of General Counsel, Connor Rasso, Vince Meehan, and Katie Riley. In addition, I would like to express my gratitude to my fellow board members and their staff for their contributions to this proposal. I would also like to recognize the support provided by the staff from the Division of Registration and Inspections, the Division of Enforcement and Investigations, and the Office of Communications and Engagement. Finally, I would like to thank the Securities and Exchange Commission staff, including the staff in the SEC's Office of the Chief Accountant, for their support and assistance. I will now turn to my fellow board members for any statements they may wish to make. Board Member Disparti, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair Williams, and good morning to everybody joining us. Thank you for being here today as we further advance our standard-setting agenda. You know, high-quality auditing standards, of course, are the foundation of high-quality auditing, and I am pleased to support staff's recommendation today. Today's proposal reinforces the central role that auditors play in our financial reporting ecosystem, protecting investors through objective and independent assessment of management's financial reporting and internal controls. Today's proposal also addresses core principles and responsibilities of the auditor. As you've heard, fundamental responsibilities such as reasonable assurance, due professional care, professional skepticism, independence, competence, and professional judgment. These principles are the hallmarks of the auditing profession, and they are fundamental to the performance of high-quality audits. While these foundational principles and responsibilities are covered in our existing standards, today's proposal reframes them in a more concise presentation, eliminates outdated and inconsistent language, and incorporates updates for changes in the auditing environment, thereby making our standards more relevant and easier to read, understand, and apply. Today's proposal also emphasizes the lead engagement partner's responsibility to exercise due professional care in supervising and reviewing the audit. While not intended to change existing requirements, I am interested on whether and how the reframed requirements might impact the nature, timing, and extent of lead partner engagement on audits, especially audits of more complex entities with multiple business units or spanning multiple geographies. I am also interested in the feasibility of the proposed accelerated audit documentation completion date, especially for smaller firms. So please do take time to provide us your comments, as they will be helpful in our deliberations. I would like to recognize and thank all the staff from across the PCAOB's divisions and offices who have contributed to today's proposal, especially Barb Vantage, our Chief Auditor, Jessica Watts, Dominika Tarasevich, Ekaterina, Akiko Upchurch, and Hunter Jones, all from the Office of the Chief Auditor, Mike Gerbit, Dylan Rassier, and John Cook from the Office of Economic and Risk Analysis, and Vince Meehan, Katie Riley, and Connor Rasso from the Office of the General Counsel. I also want to thank Chair Williams and her staff, each of my fellow board members and their staffs, Brent Seimer, Katie Driscoll, and Lucia Caramba from my team, and the staff from the SEC's Office of the Chief Accountant, all of which have collaborated and shared perspectives to help inform my thinking on this important project. So thank you. And with that, I'll turn it back to you, Chair Williams.
Thank you. Board Member Ho, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair Williams. Today, the PCAOB is releasing a new proposed auditing standard, AS1000, which replaces 5 AICPA standards that the PCAOB adopted on an interim basis in 2003. One of the priorities of this board is to update the interim standards. Many of the principles are still relevant and therefore may not require substantial changes. Nonetheless, this process of updating interim standards adopted 20 years ago allows us to collect timely input from our stakeholders. Most importantly, the process instills trust in the PCAOB standards, as well as audits conducted using our standards. This proposed standard adds a new requirement to accelerate the archival deadline of audit documentation from a maximum of 45 days to 14 days. I am especially interested in reading comment letters from small-medium register firms and emerging growth companies responding to the list of questions, and in particular, questions on whether the proposed amendment to accelerate uniformly for all firms, regardless of size, the documentation completion date is appropriate. I am also interested in reading any comments on our assumptions that the use of electronic work papers enables auditors to assemble a final set of audit documentation in less time, and the significance of the perceived benefits to investors. The proposed release represents an incremental step forward in the PCAOB standard setting agenda, but we still have much work ahead of us, particularly in leveraging data and technology to further the public interest mission of the PCAOB. I cannot emphasize enough that the PCAOB as a standard setter must have a bold vision, a vision that is forward-looking and focus on adapting our auditing standards to fit not only current uses of technology, but also future uses of emerging technologies to increase audit quality and investor protection. Recent turbulence affecting our financial institutions and our financial markets bolster my view that the PCAOB must strive to look around corners by making better use of the data we collect and unlocking its value. I support the release of the proposed AS1000 standard for public comment, and I thank the team that worked on this initiative, including Barb Vantage, Jessica Watts, Dominika Tereskevich, Hunter Jones, Katerina Disna, Akiko Upchurch, Michael Gerbert, John Cook, and Dylan Rasser. I'd also like to thank the Division of Registration and Inspections and the Office of General Counsel for their respective contributions to this proposed standard. Thank you. Back to you, Chair Williams.
Thank you. Board Member Stein, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair Williams. Today, the board considers a staff recommendation to create a new standard entitled General Responsibilities of the Auditor in Conducting an Audit. This is to ensure that auditors understand and fully comply with their professional responsibilities. I thought I would start my remarks this morning with a quote from the testimony before Congress of the president of the New York State Society of CPAs in 1933, Colonel Arthur Carter. He said, "It is generally regarded that an independent audit of any business is a good thing." While no singular figure was personally responsible for the establishment of the independent public company audit, independent audits of the financial statements of public companies became the cornerstone upon which investor confidence in the capital markets would be rebuilt after the Great Depression. This organization, the Public Company Accounting Oversight Board, was created almost 70 years later to help preserve and strengthen that cornerstone. Colonel Carter's vision of certified public accountants assuring the accuracy of financial statements included in public securities offerings and in the follow-on annual reports of public companies was enacted into law. Expectations were set without clearly defined roles and responsibilities. Foundational terms such as accepted principles of account were left out because there were none. In its report on the SEC's first it's basically the SEC's first report on a major financial fraud investigation. The SEC described the shift in loyalty when accepting the audit of a public company. Quote, "The auditor must realize that, regardless of positions of reporting to managers or to owner managers, the auditor must recognize fully the responsibility to public investors by including activities of management within the scope of work and reporting to investors." So that's in the first report that the SEC did regarding fraud. So from 1933 to 2002, the accounting profession defined for itself what it believed to be its roles and responsibilities. However, differences between the expectations of investors and the public and the auditor's own view of their work differ. Some members of the profession sought to weaken the obligation to detect fraud, which was deeply rooted in the accounting profession's first mission. By 1977, the expectation gap between what an auditor thought their role was and the responsibilities were compared to what the public thought they were became increasingly untenable. The Independent Cohen Commission noted that any gap was one-sided. Investors and other users actually had reasonable expectations of the auditor. Regardless of any expectation gap, in 1984, the United States Supreme Court ruled that the public watchdog role transcends loyalty to clients. Quote, "It is not enough that financial statements be accurate. The public must also perceive them as being accurate. Public faith in the reliability of a corporation's financial statements depends upon the public perception of the outside auditor as an independent professional." That is why I am particularly pleased that the proposed standard before us this morning anchors the role of the auditor and the obligation to protect investors. This fundamental obligation of the auditor is clearly and unambiguously set forth in the first paragraph. Auditors have a fundamental obligation to protect investors. This paragraph further instructs the auditor that investor protection is a touchstone for their work. It is how their work will be judged. Quote, "And that obligation governs the auditor's work under the standards of the PCAOB." End quote. This paragraph will provide certainty and confidence to an auditor when executing an audit about what their role is. Moreover, as with the requirements in any auditing standard, the provision can be evaluated by inspections or through firm monitoring and, if necessary, enforcement. I hope each standard this board promulgates going forward will include similar language on how it relates to the auditor's public duties. So today's proposal attempts to articulate auditor behaviors that are vitally important to providing an independent third-party audit of public company and broker-dealer financials. Reasonable assurance, due professional care, professional skepticism, professional judgment. All of these are considered foundational to an auditor's ability to rebut and challenge management of a firm. The concepts are integral to an audit, but it's hard to fully capture their significance and meaning. For example, professional skepticism lies at the heart of an auditor's challenge of management. An auditor's exercise of professional skepticism involves the auditor's mental attitude, knowledge, and biases. Auditors are uniquely situated with privileged access to management and privileged access to both public and non-public information. Auditors need to have the freedom and the willingness to decide issues in an unbiased and objective manner. This is especially important when the auditor's conclusions may be contrary to the interest of management. Historically, an auditor's failure to maintain professional skepticism has been revealed to the markets about the same time as misrepresentation or fraud. Professional skepticism is foundational to everything else that an auditor does. and investors have no tolerance for an independent auditor's work that nods without challenge. There should be no doubt in the minds of auditors, company management, investors, or other stakeholders about an auditor's professional and legal obligations to exercise professional judgment and professional skepticism free from bias and interference in order to challenge and evaluate financial information freely, or about this board's commitment to preserving the exercise of that obligation. The proposed standard also clarifies the auditor's obligation to exercise due professional care in all matters that relate to the audit. In addition, the proposal clarifies the engagement partner's responsibility for all phases of an audit, including accountability for ensuring the appropriate disposition of findings or audit issues concerning significant estimates or assumptions by management prior to the issuance of the audit report. The proposal also enhances an auditor's evaluation of the presentation of the financial statements. This includes requiring an auditor's determination of whether additional information or disclosures beyond those required by the financial reporting framework may be necessary. Finally, like my fellow board members, I'm keenly interested in hearing from investors and other commenters about the attributes of professional conduct. Have we gotten it right? Or are there other attributes we should be considering? Are the general principles and concepts fit for purpose? And if not, how should they be changed? And is the creation of one standard for generally applicable responsibilities, concepts, and principles the right approach? In closing, I can't end without acknowledging and thanking the entire standard setting team on this project. I won't go through everyone again that my fellow board members has mentioned, but I do need to give a shout out to Dominica, Jessica, Ekaterina, Akiko, Hunter, and Dylan for the many, many hours of work they've spent in getting the proposal to this point. So thanks again, and I hand the microphone back over to Chair Williams.
Thank you. Board Member Thompson, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair Williams, and good morning. I support this proposal, which includes a new standard, AS 1000, that brings together and modernizing our financial standards, which address the general responsibilities of the auditor, including due professional care and professional skepticism. The proposal also includes amendments to other standards, which clarify the due care responsibilities of the engagement partner and reduces the period for archiving audit documentation. Together, the proposed AS 1000 and related amendments reaffirm the core principles and responsibilities of auditors, yet also reflects changes in the auditing environment. The auditor's role in the effective functioning of the capital markets cannot be underestimated. AS 1000 streamlines the key principles and responsibilities, including due professional care, professional skepticism, independence, ethics, and competence that build strength and trust in our capital markets. When these attributes are absent from an audit, it elevates the risk of investor harm. AS 1000 and related amendments further clarify the engagement partner's due care responsibilities to align with existing supervision and review requirements. The auditing profession relies on an apprenticeship model. It is therefore imperative that engagement partners perform their due care responsibilities to ensure that the professional judgment exercised and audit conclusions reached during an audit are properly supported. This is particularly heightened in a hybrid working environment. The amendments also shorten the archive period, permitting our inspectors to begin high-risk inspections earlier, which allows for earlier completion of inspection reports and facilitates spotlight documents and other staff guidance, thereby enhancing transparency. Auditors that embody the foundational responsibilities and principles of the proposed AS 1000 and related amendments will drive consistently higher audit quality, resulting in a greater investor protection, and enhance trust in our markets. I support this proposal for comment and look forward to learning the views of our stakeholders. It is particularly important that commenters provide any insights they may have on the practical application of this proposal and on whether there are other amendments that should be considered. I, like my fellow board members, would like to thank the many individuals involved in this proposal. It has been truly a collaborative effort across divisions and offices, including specifically from the Office of Chief Auditor Barb Vantage, Jessica Watts, Dominika Taraskiewicz, Ekaterina Disna, Akiko Upchurch, and Hunter Jones. From the Office of Economic and Risk Analysis, Mike Gerbett, John Cook, and Dylan Razer. From the Office of General Counsel, Connor Razzo, Vince Meehan, and Katie Riley. I would also like to thank my fellow board members and my staff for their efforts towards the standard setting project. Thank you, and back to you, Chair Williams.
Thank you. Unless there are any further discussions from the board, I would now call for a vote on the staff recommendation. Board Member Disparti.
Aye.
Thank you. Board Member Ho.
Aye.
Thank you. Board Member Stein.
Aye.
Thank you. Board Member Thompson.
Aye.
Thank you. All votes are unanimous. The recommendation is approved. That concludes the PCAOB's open meeting for today. As there is no further business, this meeting is now adjourned. Thank you for your participation. You may now disconnect from the webcast and teleconference.